Today we're talking top cities to live for a young single man in the U.S. I'm going to give my experiences as someone who's traveled constantly. I think I've been in over 12 cities in the last year or so. So I have a lot of experience because I've been able to travel, and also have a lot of experience from the ethnic perspective, since as a Asian minority, you just get a different perspective. I've lived in cities, like currently I'm in Florida, where I'm usually the only non-white person at the venue. So let's just get started. First and foremost, biggest factor, girl-guy ratio within your age range. So New York City, probably one of the best ones. Washington, D.C. is another huge one. And the thing is, I don't think people control for all the factors they should. I mean, a lot of the top articles, content, social media posts on this, they failed to factor in a lot of factors that are important, like age, ethnicity, into the equation. They just focus on girl-guy ratio, but if you just focus on that, you're accounting for all the people who are like 70 years old or 10 years old. So you have to filter down to the right age range, and then you also have to have a bare minimum size, in my opinion, because from my experience living in cities with 100,000 or less, take when I was in certain parts of Georgia, like I lived in Savannah for a couple weeks, lived in some other areas. There's just so little activity that it's hard to bump into people. There's just like no one in the shopping centers, like here. It's fairly empty. So you have to account for like a bare minimum. So there's also personal preference, do you like a big city, a small city? But generally bigger cities mean more opportunities, but then you have to account for like, the wear and tear on you if you don't like big cities. Now, what other factors? You may want to control for ethnicity if there's a certain type that you prefer, a type you don't prefer. Those are things that you need to go on to like a tool. And unfortunately, there's not many tools that do this, but I think there's one or two out there. And then you filter that in and find out what works for you. Another huge factor, just cultural influence. And then another is kind of like, I guess you would describe it as racial influence. Because those play a role, whether you like it or not, especially in the places I've traveled to, where they're just like southern, there's not as much going around. I have learned through living in these cities, it's not necessarily their fault. They just, when you live in a smaller town or city, and the only experience you've had with the Asian is on TV or how Hollywood depicts it, you've never seen an actual Asian, or not often at least, you form stereotypes even harder, or that's all you're going off of. So for me, I'm being more empathetic about it. It's not necessarily that they're being mean, they just have these preferences. So that's another thing that you have to work through. And of course, there's certain cities where that preference or that culture works better. In certain European countries or Asian countries, or even in LA, I hear the symbol or the picture of an Asian is oftentimes much more attractive, much more masculine, successful, versus in other places it may be seen more just based off media as low value. Now, another huge thing that you want to think about is, are you a low value mate? Are you, compare yourself to the average 10 people in your city. Where do you stand on that list? Are you number 1 or number 9 on that list? Because from my experience, having lived in these various places, even New York City, which is arguably one of the best cities, if you're low value, it doesn't matter what city, you will struggle. From experience, you will struggle no matter the city. You could go to the best city, DC and so forth, and you will struggle. And I think this video is for the positive people who are like willing to learn and grow and change, because I think unfortunately this topic also attracts very negative, skeptical, toxic, resentful people, and they have decided in their mind that they're just going to keep blaming other things, and they like to latch on to things like the city, like, oh, this city is just terrible and so forth, and they call it a lot of names, and then they think moving to another city will solve it. But in reality, if they move to that dream city of theirs, nothing changes. And so it's a rather toxic mindset where they're always blaming something else, whether it's they're blaming women, they're calling women or other people and other stuff very nasty names. That's not who I want to attract in this video. You have to have a positive mindset. You have to be realistic, and you have to realize, okay, if you're in some of these the best cities and you're still struggling, it's a hard pill to swallow. I get it, but you need to start upgrading yourself. Go to the gym. I was just at the gym. Improve your fashion sense. Work on yourself. Improve your style. Improve your communication skills. Be more warm and friendly. Figure out how you're coming across. If you're coming across cold, be more warm and friendly. So that's another big issue that I don't think people stress enough. Yes, cities have a huge impact, but there's other things. So what else is good? Well, for some people, I think larger places like Boston, Chicago work. Austin, I hear, is very good. But you generally want those larger metropolitan areas where the logistics are good, where you don't have to drive very far to get somewhere. Some people say LA is good, but traffic parking can make dating very hard driving there. So there's all these other factors at play. Yes, New York City is good, but for me and many others, you need to commute 45 minutes plus because you live in a different district, whether that's Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens. I've experienced it. It's kind of tough if someone's in a completely different district than you. Those are other things that you have to factor in. And there's more too, like more subtle things like your personal preference, religious biases of a city, or just, once again, cultural preferences. Some people say Arizona cities are like amazing. There's so many beautiful women there, but there's a very strong preference where, you know, white women only date white men in those areas from what I hear. So a lot of factors I feel like just never get talked about or focused on, and no wonder, because I think they oversimplify cities, and I don't think you have to find this like maximum formula. If you're like optimizing it to that degree, then you're probably, you know, hitting diminishing returns. And you may find that sometimes it's not the data. Sometimes you just need to move to a place, try it out for 2 weeks, and see if it actually works or doesn't work. It's different for every person. Your vibe, your style may have an effect. Now, what if you can't afford to travel to all these places like me? Well, thanks to online dating, what I used to do, I couldn't travel for a very long time. I'm much older than you think. It took me a long time to get there. Use Tinder Plus or Hinge or all these other dating apps that let you set your location in different places. And then you can just kind of get a gauge on, you know, how many matches and what type of matches you're getting in each of these places. Now, another thing to factor in with online though is that most people's online profiles suck. And so maybe you come across better in person. So there is a bit of a difference between testing online versus in person. But try and, you know, work with credible people who you can trust to get your profile optimized as much as possible. Talk to other female friends, talk to experts, get your profile optimized, and then just do a test on each of these. If you're, once again, if you're low value, you may get like very few matches on all these cities. But if you can get a decent level, then you can see, like, you could just jump to all these places online and get a sense for which one works better for you. Now, the truth of the matter is, it matters what city you live, but it is definitely not the end all be all. A high value man can probably do well in any of these cities. Some cities are just so small or so stacked against you because of the girl-guy ratio, like San Francisco or Seattle, that it's clear it's negatively impacting you. If it's to that obvious of an extent, move if this really matters to you. But there is a point at diminishing returns where you have to focus on other things. So as a recap, I think New York is best, especially for longer term things. I hear Miami, Vegas are good for shorter term dating. Austin is kind of a mix of both, probably longer term works well too. Raleigh, Durham, for me, I found it to be very suburby. You had to drive everywhere. So some people have heard good things. I just thought it was okay. It was just a giant suburb to me, but that's another place. And then on the west, it's, I would say, maybe San Diego, or some of those other big cities, Boise, Idaho, some of those others could be good. You're generally looking for large metropolitan areas, and keep in mind the minimum population. Generally, I think the larger the better. It just increases your chances because, like, you just end up bumping into more people compared to when you compare a 2 million person city to a 200,000 person city. For a more customized answer for you, like I said, try the online dating test I mentioned, or use one of those tools online, city data, and then filter based off some of the factors I mentioned, and figure out what works for you. If you're not someone who has, if you're white, then something like Boston or Arizona could work for you because the cultural preferences are not against you. But if you're Asian, for example, that's something you have to put into it. From what I hear, those places can be more culturally resistant. But that said, I mean, I've seen high value people do well in all these places, Houston and so forth. So at some point you have to look at yourself in the mirror and work on it as well. But it has a huge impact, I think, and from experience, a really small city just sucks.